It is the second model introduced in the 2025 Full Metal Panic Volume 2 rerun, and the fifth model overall in the entirety of this collaboration run. It is FMP04 Urzufalke, with a mostly new kit of Assault Boost, Emit Claw, Range Claw, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Assault, which converts a percentage of the leg's total combined resist stats into power when using scatter type skills. Now, the Full Metal Panic collaboration thus far into Volume 2 and all of the models of Volume 1 have showcased a lot of very powerful skills or parts in some form or capacity, either with very good leg abilities, good skills, or even just parts in general with good numbers to keep in your libraries. Urzufalke, however, is extremely synergetic in what he brings to the table and puts the absolute and most fullest use of what he brings to the table with a very synergetic kit across the board. Assault Boost on the head part is a support skill that, when activated, boosts the success and power of scatter type skills, which are skills that will damage one part normally and then two others randomly for extra damage when using those scatter type skills by 80%. Now, normally compared to most other boosts such as shoot boost, fight boost, guard boost, and so on, that usually only apply a 50%, Assault Boost applying an 80% is extremely noticeable. As, for example, with that right arm of Emit Claw having a success of 1049 and a power of over 2000, 80% of that is going to make that extremely notable, and that's before any other modifiers are applied even to those base numbers, such as damage boost, Marauder bonus, or anything else of the like. So, even if it is specific to scatter skills only, that is extremely useful to guarantee that your hits are not only going to be extremely likely to land, but also be just as equally as painful when actually dealing the damage. Emit Claw on the right arm is a brand new skill being introduced into the game, which falls in the same emit type of attacks much like Emit Blade, Emit Shot, or even Emit Hammer, so the behaviors are going to be relatively similar in this case. Emit Claw, however, of course, is a scatter type skill, which means it will damage one part normally and then two others randomly for extra damage, but it also has a couple of rather interesting conditions that, if met, can make it extremely and catastrophically painful. The first of which is it requires 30 CG and your user's charge gauge to use. So if you do not have 30 CG in your gauge, unfortunately you are not even able to select Emit Claw as a skill you can use on your turn. However, upon consuming 30 CG, Emit Claw's damage doubles whatever its base value is and also grants defense ignore on top of that. So this means that if you do manage to have at least 30 CG in your gauge when you choose to use this, that over 2000 power, well, guess what? Now it's closer to 4000, and it ignores defense on top of that, which means it's going to be even more painful than what any other final modifiers are willing to show as far as the math is concerned. However, the drawback, like I said, is the fact that it does require 30 CG in the gauge to use. Otherwise, if you do not have it, and because of how Emit Claw behaves, this will put Urzufalke in a little bit of a CG sustained requirement territory if you choose to make use of this move more consistently or very often through the battle. Range Claw on the left arm, and the other brand new skill being introduced, again, is kind of in the same range of Range Sword and Range Pile, so not necessarily anything new per se, but a new effect being added makes it very, very nice. The Range Claw in particular, much like any other ranged attack, will get a damage plus when attacking enemies that are closest to Urzufalke, but the farther away the target is, that damage plus converts to success plus. And that alone makes this a very, very powerful skill that you can use at any range and not really go wrong with, especially given the fact that it has a base power of 1500 and a success of almost 1200 means you're not really going to be being dodged or grazed a lot when using this particular skill. However, if you manage to successfully catch an enemy on their cooldown phase, very much so akin to, say, Sujigiri or Sanction in some cases, Range Claw gets a guaranteed crit when attacking the enemy, and you get a damage effect added on to that. At the cost, you're not able to dodge or defend naturally. So again, much like with Sanction or Sujigiri, you will want to try to emphasize attacking an enemy on cooldown when using it. But given the fact that it does have damage plus or success at close or long range respectively like this, does kind of give it to where if you do it, great, but if not, you're not really going to be hurting overall too terribly with it. Biped legs means that Urzufalke will have relatively solid coverage across most terrains with some very solid terrain compatibility, and the leg ability of Assault also is extremely synergetic with his kit across the board. Not only does it boost the effects of scatter skills like Emit Claw and Range Claw with a total combined percentage of his combined resist stats, but it also is a free effect that kicks in every time a scatter effect is used. So you don't even need to do anything special or different in order for it to kick in. In the mobility department, he's packing a very solid 910, which puts him in a very solid area in the speed department. So this means that before any other terrain or Meta-Rodder modifiers, he's already going to be off to a very good start in the speed department. Evade at 1459 is nice too, as this means he can dodge or graze fairly solidly as long as he doesn't have a no dodge penalty on cooldown. A melee resist of 1344 and a shoot resist of 975 are kind of in that upper lower end of the cusp of where you want to sit, especially with your shoot resist being under 1000. Now granted, that extra 25 really won't be all that noticeable as far as damage reduction is concerned, but that's also where the clincher comes in with Assault, because the way Assault behaves is very much so akin to Weapon Master, where it'll take the total percentage of the resist stat and add it as bonus power. However, if your resist stats are not very high, or if the stats they pull from are relatively low or kind of in a middle ground, the bonus damage you can get out of it also falls, which means you won't be dealing as much, and it won't be nearly as painful with that passive ability kicked in. In the armor department, he's packing about 3900 for the head, about 4079, almost 4100 for the right arm, 3700 for the left, and just over 3800 for the legs. So he's fairly solidly bulky as far as the HP is concerned, especially with a lot of his bulk being focused primarily on that right arm, which is of course the Emit Claw. So even if his damage reduction with his resist stats might be kind of middling in a lot of cases, his armor does make up for it. So he won't get crippled or shot down as easily as long as he's able to keep his head above water and people are able to protect him from any time he's in a no dodge or a no dodge and no defense penalty. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Urzufalke a pretty solid 8 out of 10. He's an extremely synergetic kit that requires almost no follow-up or setup in order to use right out of the box. However, there are a couple of concerns to bring about if you're planning to use Urzufalke. The first of which is Emit Claw having the CG requirement, and especially with it being mandatory. Unlike, say, Hypercharge Blade or Charge Blade, which you can still use even if you don't have the charge. Emit Claw is extremely expensive to use, but if you are able to pair it off with a metal that is CG sustained, you can probably counter this fairly solidly. And Range Claw, even if it does have that damage condition on the enemy being cooldown, it's still a relatively solid attack you can just about anywhere. And the leg ability of Assault pairs extremely well with Assault Boost and of course Emit Claw and Range Claw as the final result. So if you're looking for any really powerful scatter type attacks, a very self-synergetic mech like this is the perfect option for you. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him equally at an 8 out of 10 for these very same reasons. The nice thing about Assault Boost and Assault is that they do not discriminate whether the scatter type skill is a shooting or a melee type of attack. So that means you can pair those off with just about anything that matches that requirement. Gatling, Giga Gatling, Napalm, Power Napalm, Claw, Charge Claw, anything that's a scatter type skill you can put to extremely good use with Assault and or Assault Boost as you choose to use them. Emit Claw and Range Claw also can see some extremely viable uses in the right situations, but it would be recommended that you pair Emit Claw with either an auto charge leg ability or even something like Heroic as well to boost the CG sustain, or even pair it off with a full charge head so you can use it as quickly as you can from turn onwards.